This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about cultivating a flourishing family culture through life-giving habits. Today on the show, I want to talk about planning a flourishing homeschool year. I'm so excited to share with you my new book, The Inspired Homeschool. It's all about how history's heroes light a path toward joyful, confident homeschooling. And so today I'm going to be sharing a little bit of the pre-order bonus workshop on planning a flourishing homeschool year. So if you want a video replay of this with the slides, you can go to my page, inspiredhomeschoolbook.com, pre-order the Inspired Homeschool, and with that, you'll get this as a free workshop with a workbook, a really helpful planning worksheet, along with a great student planner. I love this one for myself. It actually gives you a great place to recap your week and plan goals, and it has a habit tracker, but it's also a lovely planner for students who are ready to be writing on their own and sort of starting to make their own goals. So I'm going to get right into the content on Plan a Flourishing Homeschool Year. I know so many of you are planning right now, and the Peaceful Press is actually having a birthday sale. We've been creating curriculum and bringing joy to homeschool families for 10 years now. And so this month, for one more week, we have a sale. You can use code 10 years for 10% off. But we also always have Restoration 10 for 10% off. So as I'm talking, if you're like, yes, I need to go grab some Peaceful Press curriculum, save 10% with that code 10 years or Restoration 10. Okay, first of all, I know that not everybody who listens to the Restoration Home podcast homeschools. And we're talking a little bit extra about homeschooling this summer because I have a new book out on homeschooling. I think you're going to love it. It's about how in history, that's how people were educated. Jesus, Joan of Arc, C.S. Lewis, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Benjamin Franklin. So many people were homeschooled, at least for part of their education, and grew up to change the world. And so I am a big believer on the power of homeschooling for creating a flourishing family, for nurturing healthy kids. But I'm going to tell you a few other reasons why in this chat. And I know, like I said, some of you don't homeschool. Some of you might be thinking about it though. And this podcast could be the thing that helps you get over that hump of fear that's keeping you from starting. So I know it can feel overwhelming though. If you're getting started, even if you've been at it for a little while, it can get overwhelming. And you can be like, are my kids going to keep up? You might think that you need to compete with the public schools, but actually homeschooling has a proven success rate. Homeschooled students typically score 15 to 25% higher on standardized achievement tests. They perform statistically significantly better academically than students in traditional schools. They really do well on many measures of social and emotional development, including leadership skills, family cohesion, and their self-concept. Homeschooling is really flexible. So homeschool students often achieve strong academic results while spending fewer total instructional hours. Also, homeschool children regularly participate in social and educational activities outside of the home, which makes them great in community involvement. So there's so much research that says that homeschooling is great. It's great for your kids, great for your families, great for your attachment, which is one of the big things that we do talk about on the Restoration Home podcast. But often what happens is you as a family, maybe you have a child who's being bullied or who's just not thriving in school, or they're trying to tell you you need to put them on medication to get them through the 8 hours or 6 hours of classroom time. And so you pull them out. But then you are feeling afraid of falling behind. So you start putting your kids on a computer school program at home. But the computer schools and like trying to keep up with the public schools is actually not the goal here. That's not the goal because they're not doing a great job educating our kids. And so don't just switch out of public school to full-time computer school. There's an article from the Free Press, and they found that students working on computers are falling behind. The long-term data shows that students are showing a slightly worsening ability to comprehend and retain what they read from screens. So, when you go home, but then you just fill up their schedule with online learning, you're maybe not going to be achieving what you want. We in the Peaceful Press Restoration Home community, we advocate for literature-based learning. This is based on the Charlotte Mason philosophy, where you read books to your children, you have your children read books, and then you talk about them. This is how C.S. Lewis spent his high school years. He was homeschooled by a tutor, and they read a lot of great books and talked about them. And this is, what they advocate for in the Thomas Jefferson education and in the book Hero Education, one of my favorite high school homeschooling resources. The core is reading books together and talking about them. And so, some of the research on literature-based learning highlights that there is deeper reading comprehension when children are reading from print books. There is reduced digital distraction and improved attention. I know for my kids, when I started them on maybe an online math program, it was just too easy to then hop off and start researching something or hop over to some kind of a chat forum. And it's just not as easy to sink into learning when you're on a computer. A stronger foundation in literacy skills. My kids all scored really well on the SAT, and I believe it's so much due to all the reading we did. We read so many books aloud, and they read so many books on their own because we didn't give them tons of other options besides reading. We didn't have a lot of computers in the most of my children's upbringing. Also, literature-based learning encourages face-to-face interaction, more conversational reading, discussion, shared interpretation. These are things that are hard to replicate with computer screens. And when you are learning face-to-face like that, your children are also developing really good emotional intelligence and the ability to interact with humans. One of the things that is probably most needed in the future is interpersonal skills. Supports a flexible multi-environment learning. So, if you're doing literature-based learning, you can learn anywhere. But also, for me, reading aloud, literature-based learning is a way of passing on information and discussing books. It focuses on formation. If you want to shape a worldview, if you want to train your children's hearts, then spending time in morning time together, reading aloud, talking about the books, reading the Bible, talking about the books, that's what's really going to shape the character and values and virtue of your children. And so this is why with the Peaceful Press Restoration Home community, we advocate for homeschooling, but not just homeschooling, literature-based homeschooling. Ray Bradbury, he was an author. He said, "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them." And in Deuteronomy 6:7, it says, "You shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise." And so we are being called to pass on the values of God to our children. And that happens in conversations. It happens around the books we're reading and the discussions we're having. But so often we, as homeschool moms, we're crippled by fear, but we've been given authority by God to make decisions for our children. Matthew 18:19 says, Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." So we are under the authority of God as Christian homeschoolers, which means we need to stop listening to the voice of fear and listen to what God has called us to. So I'm going to talk more about making a customized plan for your family homeschool. And if you purchase my book, inspiredhomeschoolbook.com, there's a workbook that goes with this. And there's also a workshop on YouTube so you can get the slides and the workbook. And there'll be places for you to really record your ideas and refine your vision for your homeschool so that you can really create this flourishing homeschool atmosphere. Okay, so the first step is define your why. You need to ask yourself some questions like, when I imagine a flourishing homeschool, I see blank. In a flourishing homeschool year, my children will feel. In a flourishing year, I will feel. This year flourishing does not mean, uh, or maybe the questions I want to be, I want to do, I want my children to remember. So you have to stop before you start planning what curriculum to use. You really have to define why, because if you don't know what you're about, it's going to be too easy to get distracted and start doing what everybody else is doing. And so figuring out why you're doing this is going to create more peace and presence and attunement. For our family, our priorities as a homeschool family were time in nature, worship, mission, simple living, hospitality, and just really strong connections between us and our children. And that meant we said no to a lot of other things. And it's not that those other things were bad, it just wasn't our vision. If our vision had been more about teamwork or physical fitness, we would have prioritized sports more. If our vision had been more about, maybe a even stronger vision towards music, we would have been not just having our kids in music lessons, but also having them in orchestra and having them, practicing their musical instruments more often. Like, you're going to make choices in your life. You can't do everything. And if you try, you'll be real frazzled, real burnt out. And so what you have to do is decide what's important to your family. And I think that question, what I want my children to remember about life in our home, is so important because we are laying this foundation for them. There's so much research around joy being the foundation of health, being the foundation of learning. There's a lot of research around happy memories, putting our body into a regulated nervous system. So a lot of the dysregulation and numbing out and all these problems that you see in adults, a lot of that starts in childhood with just too much rushing, too little time to process or reflect. And so for our family, it was really important to have margin. And I think probably for your family, it's important as well. And so deciding what is important, what you want your children to remember, is going to help you develop that focus. And then the next step after you've developed a vision, and I know this takes some time, that's why I highly recommend getting the book, The Inspired Homeschool. I have a whole chapter on vision, as well as getting that free workshop that comes when you pre-order it so that you have some, just real direction about what you want your homeschool to be like. And then step 2 is find a focus for the year. I loved having a focus for each homeschool year. And partly in our family, we did a cycle of history. So we would do American history, then European history, then world history. And so in the Peaceful Press, we have 3 history cycles. We have the Precious People, world history, and geography. So it's a great introductory homeschool resource for that first year because it's very sweet, innocent children's stories, and it's about people and cultures around the world, but it's not going to deal with sort of deeper things like Greek myths or major world wars. And then we have the Playful Pioneers, which is our first American history cycle, the Kind Kingdom, which is our first European history cycle, and then we have the Precious People, world history, which is a little bit more in depth and is better for sort of those later elementary years. And then we have Playful Pioneers 2, which is this awesome American geography and history-based resource, and Kind Kingdom Volume 2, which is just a little bit more in depth and appropriate even to use into middle school. So you need to find a focus for the year. And for me, it was often our history cycle. And then it was also maybe somewhere we were going to go. Maybe it was a book we wanted to read, or maybe a habit we wanted to work on. And in the beginning of the Peaceful Press Planner, we'll link that in the show notes. We actually have a whole worksheet you can fill out with some of the books you want to read for the year, maybe your word or your verse for the year, things to learn and try. Having some of those big picture focuses in mind as you plan your homeschool year can help you direct. Like maybe last year you did all interest-led studies, and this year you feel like you need to do more basic skills, and that's going to change what curriculum you even buy. And so thinking about, what was really hard for us last year, what made us cry last year, what did we love, what really sparked learning, that's going to help you choose wisely when you have that focus. So taking time to create a focus for the year, pick out the word or theme, habits to work on, what delights your children, what's hard for them. And then, like I said, the Peaceful Press, we have history cycles. So if you're starting with the very first year, do Precious People, world geography, then Playful Pioneers, then Kind Kingdom, then Precious People World History, then Playful Pioneers Volume 2. It's also great in 4th grade for a like a state history resource. And then we have Kind Kingdom Volume 2. So pick your focus. Step 3, clarify your priorities. Recognize the season that you have. And so, we've talked about your vision, we've talked about your word for the year, but sometimes you also have to recognize your season. You might be in a season where you really do just have to focus on math and reading aloud and your writing or phonics or spelling. Like, it may be a year that you really have to pare down, and all of the fun projects in the Peaceful Press are so important for STEM learning. But maybe this is a year that you're just going to do 1 or 2 a month instead of 1 a week. Maybe this is a year that you need more nature time. And so you're going to actually scale back and just do a really simple math workbook and get outside more to regulate your nervous system. So you have to recognize your season and clarify your priorities for the season. The step 4 is plan a sustainable schedule. I love planning schedules. I love making them up and posting them on my wall or putting them inside a cupboard, putting them on our bulletin board. It's just so helpful for me to see things at a glance and to kind of have the week systematized. So, for instance, I will write out the year at a glance. And in the Peaceful Press digital planner, we have a full year at a glance that you can just fill in. What are the big things? What are the big rocks this year? Maybe it's a family vacation and you want to plan some learning around that. Maybe it's a bunch of birthdays. Maybe you're having a baby this year. And so looking at the year at a glance and sort of factoring in what's going to happen around that time. For instance, when I had a baby, I would often take at least a few weeks off before and after the baby came so that I could spend a little time bonding with the baby and resting before I jumped back into a full homeschool schedule. And that might mean you're going to school a little bit in the summer. For us, in that season where we were having babies in the fall, I had a baby I had 2 in September, 1 in October, and 3 in December. In that season, we schooled in the summer as well. It was hot in the summer, not much else to do. And so we started school in August and we finished in June, and then we do some school in July as well. And so deciding, what does the year hold? Also a week at a glance. For me, the more I could systemize the week. So, Mondays is picture study in the Peaceful Press. Tuesdays is project in the Peaceful Press. Wednesday is nature walk in the Peaceful Press. And Thursday is baking. And then we have Fridays open for field trips or co-op days or cleaning your house, for instance. So plan out what your week is going to hold, what's going to be important to you during the week. And then also, as you're planning that schedule, what could be combined or eliminated? As you write down, fill in the things that are going to happen no matter what. Your music lessons, maybe sport events, maybe a Bible study, and then decide, is this too much? Like, I really wanted to have several days at home, at least. I didn't want to have more than 1 morning outing a week. I didn't like to have any morning outings because our morning time is so important to us. But you need to make sure you're home some if you're homeschooling. And so looking at that week at a glance and deciding what days you're going to make sure you're home to homeschool and what you can add to that. And then step 5, grow with good habits. What are the habits that are going to make your dreams a reality? What's your biggest hope for the year and a habit that will support that hope? And in the Restoration Home community, we open again in July. We work on habits every month. In June, right now, we're working on a daily walk. We're working on a decluttering one area. Summer is such a good time to get your house in order for homeschooling. And then we're also working on reading aloud and prayer time and memory verses. Every month we have 3 different habits that we work on, and you win prizes for being consistent with your habits. And so it's such a good way to it's such a good way to really build towards a more peaceful life as you work on these habits together. So I'm so happy that we could sit here and chat together about planning a flourishing homeschool year. It's a free workshop when you pre-order Inspired Homeschool book. You can find the Inspired Homeschool book at inspiredhomeschoolbook.com. As well, we have a sale running this week only for the Peaceful Press curriculum, 10% off with code 10 years. But you can also get 10% off with Restoration 10. If you go to our blog, there are so many more resources like this at thepeacefulpress.com. We just posted an article on simple, effective homeschool language arts. So many of you are, you're using the Peaceful Press, which includes copy work and poetry and literature and Bible and history and picture study. But then you're maybe adding something that's a little bit too much. And you could just be doing a simple spelling curriculum, or you could be just focusing on phonics. You could be from grades 4 to 8, just focusing on some grammar. It doesn't have to take all day. And so for our daily homeschool schedule, we had 1 to 2 hours of morning time starting around 9 a.m. And then we would have an hour of math, an hour of language arts. And then the afternoons were free for projects or outings or catching up on housework, laundry. The kids could play outside. We usually had a little chore time in the morning and then one more chore session in the afternoon, so we could kind of get the house ready for the evening and start the next day with a lot of peace and presence. I'm so glad you joined today. For sure, leave a review, share this podcast with a friend. We want to help you develop habits for a flourishing family. And so in the Restoration Home podcast, we have episodes every week on developing habits for a flourishing family culture. We're so excited that you've listened to us today, and we'd love for you to get your hands on the Inspired Homeschool book. It's about 10 homeschoolers in history who changed the world, and it's so much fun to see the diverse learning experiences. In the book, I share practical tips for homeschooling and really give you a clear path. But these homeschoolers had many different stories, many different ways. And I think that's one of the most encouraging things is that homeschooling doesn't have to be perfect. You can have bad years and it's going to be okay. You can, try a new curriculum every year and it's going to be okay. These people who really made such an impact on culture, Benjamin Franklin, Joan of Arc, C.S. Lewis, Leonardo da Vinci, they had very diverse learning experiences. But what they did have is parents who were, in many cases, caring and involved and invested, or other adults, special tutors, special teachers in their homeschool situation. So we're excited for you to get your hands on the Inspired Homeschool book at inspiredhomeschoolbook.com.